I'm Alex Haig with Farm Country Trader, and I'm here with Josh Krenz, and he's with...
Today, I wear many hats, Alex. So depending on what we want to talk about today or any day, but I farm, I have a fertilizer business, and I could do a couple other entrepreneurial activities as well.
All right.
But my passion, if we have to talk about it all day, every day long, is cattle.
Cattle.
I'm a cattle guy at heart, so.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I'm obviously new to the journey. So for people that don't know, I got my first cow from Josh, and here we are, 4 years later, 5 years now with the new year. So it's a cold day.
Yeah.
It's like -1, low of -1.
If we were in Scotland in the Highlands where Highland cattle come from, today would be a perfect day. This is exactly what they love there. So
Right.
Our Minnesota, and you're from Iowa, I'm in Minnesota, but our summers get even a little bit too hot for those cattle.
Yeah, I know. I always wonder how the cattle in like Missouri, they have much less fur, but they also have a different look, it seems, every once in a while anyways. But
yeah, a lot shorter hair on them can happen in those type of climates, and they don't necessarily have to deal with some of the same things as bugs in our state bird here, the mosquito. So.
Yeah, those things aren't very small. We always joke about them being the size of birds and whatnot. My family and I, we go up to Arneson's Rocky Point up in Lake of the Woods.
Okay.
On an annual fishing trip where we have in the past. And yeah, we've had some times where you don't really want to be wearing short sleeve shirts.
For sure. Sure. It's the 9 nice days that we get a year. That's why we live in the upper Midwest, right? So
Right.
we live for those days.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if there's no wind and it's above 70, that's a good day,
It's
right?
a beautiful day.
Flip-flops, shorts on. So yeah, let's hop into it. So I want to just start. What inspired you to get into your passion, which is cattle and Scottish Highlands and the brands that have now come out of your passion?
Yeah, absolutely. So it goes back, it starts when I was a kid. So I grew up on a farm in Wisconsin. So I grew up on a dairy farm, and we had some shorthorn beef cattle that we ran as well. And I knew that I always wanted to be more on the cattle side of the business. Even growing up, I had some brothers and stuff that kind of always did more of the machinery work and the equipment stuff. And I always hung around with the AI tech when he came and talked to him. And as a kid, I used to go through, and we'd have a couple times a year that someone would come out and rate your cows and do matings and stuff like that. So most kids would do 7, 8 years old. They might be playing games and stuff. I was creating records on what bulls all of our cows should be mated to at 8 years old. That's what I did. Right?
Yeah.
That was weird.
Knew
right?
what you wanted. And
I knew what I wanted. And so fast forward, went to school, met my wife, did some career things, did corporate life for a while, and had a period of my life where I couldn't have cattle. I lived in places where it couldn't happen. You couldn't have cattle in DC and KC and places where I lived at that time. Had good barbecue in KC, but no cattle when you're living there. So we moved to Princeton, Minnesota in 2007, my wife Maria and I, and we started our farm, Windland Flats, at that time. And I knew that I wanted to get cattle, but I didn't know what kind of cattle. And my wife, not a city girl, country girl, but a non-cow girl, kept saying, no, like we're not getting cattle. This is not smart. We should get cattle. And so finally one day I came home from, at that time, I was still working my corporate job. And she showed me a picture of these shaggy yak looking things.
yeah,
Right?
a lot of people think they're yaks.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, not everybody seems to understand that if it has horns, it might be a female cow.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
we
they
get that
think
all the time.
A cow is a bull, or a bull can be a cow too. No.
Right.
That's a little bit different.
Yeah, and it's not just Highlands, it's all cattle, right?
Yeah.
It's all cattle. They think they're deer, right?
Yeah.
That's where they get that from. The rest is history. We got a couple head of cattle, and then I took my 8-year-old mentality to my Highland world today, and I went from you need a cow and a bull to nope, you need cows, you need the AI, you need to do embryo work, and actually created a whole couple of businesses out of that. We created Windland Flats, which does grass-fed beef and raises breeding stock, and then we created a company, Highland Genetics, which imports and exports embryos and semens across the world.
Yep. And I'm a customer.
You are
Or a past customer.
Yep, you are
So,
a past customer on both sides.
Yeah,
really.
on both
So,
sides. Yeah.
yeah, so it's been fun, and we learn and get to meet a lot of new people because of it from all over the world. And a couple weeks we'll be in Denver for our annual national show, where I get to see, it's like the Highland family reunion. I get to see all these people that I've talked to throughout the year and different things. So it's a pretty cool network. And the Highland industry is just built with a lot of really good, fun people. So that's how we
awesome.
met, right?
Yeah,
That's what you said.
no,
So
for sure. Yeah, I got obsessed, got the itch back in 2020, of course. And you sold me Celia, and she was a bred heifer with a calf, and we ended up naming him Hamish. I'm not sure if you recall.
Yep.
And so we fed him out, and then over the years just got unlucky with not getting a heifer calf out of her, and mostly just been putting meat in the freezer and being self-sufficient for the most part. But obviously I still love the breed and everything like that.
And that's ultimately their beef breed, right? People think of them because of the long hair and the big horns, and they're fancy, and Queen Elizabeth raised them and all these things, right? All the fashionable, in vogue things about Highlands. But at the end of the day, they're a superior cut of beef. That's the opinion of a guy that raises Highland grass-fed beef. And you've eaten your own too.
Yeah.
So
Every day, almost.
yeah,
Chili, burrito tacos, whatever.
sure.
I'm living off the land a little bit.
Yep. And it's a good, from a health standpoint, it's high in protein, it's low in fat, because Highland hair, a lot of people don't know. Most mammals, you and I, right? Like, we eat too much at a wedding, we put on more fat, right? That's what we do. We, as Highlands, grow more hair to stay warm, and people put on more fat naturally. Other mammals do too. So Highland cattle, because they have the hair, naturally they have less fat. It's just naturally how they are. So
Right.
very lean.
And then much less needs for shelter and stuff like that. Not that you don't want to have shelter, but they're pretty happy if they're out of the wind. It's just nuts. They're just a sturdy breed.
They are.
It's just crazy.
It's funny, going back to the dairy farm kid from Wisconsin. The first Highlands that I got, we had a run-in shed when we moved here to the farm. I thought, they need shelter, we'll put them in the run-in shed. Oh no, they thought that was the stupidest thing ever.
No, they don't use it.
Yep.
I've seen it myself. We, at the Blind Butcher Brewing Company, where we had them, we had that big storm come through. Can't remember what it was called, some fancy name, but it was like a wall of dirt, and it just picked up our little shed and threw it on top of a propane tank. And they weren't using it, so they didn't really miss it.
Sure.
But we had it.
Yep. You didn't have to put it back anyways. They didn't need it. So
yeah, that was just a crazy little happenstance. But yeah, I think we'll start moving on to the next question, and we're going to be really reaching back here. Do you recall your first customer?
Again, I wear a couple hats, just like you do, Alex. So it's a customer in which realm. On the meat business, Highland cattle side of the business, our first customers were friends and family, right? Because that's what you do, right? You only have a couple steers. You don't have enough to reach out. Our first real commercial customer is a co-op grocery store in Cambridge, Minnesota, called City Center Market. Excuse me. And then we've had City Center Market as an ongoing customer with us since 2011. So they've been our longest standing customer, maybe not our first as far as like customers, because most of that were friends and family, but they were our first commercial customer when it came to the meat business. And then the cattle business, selling young stock to people, I'd have to even go back and look. I don't remember. The great thing about, having 25, 30 calves a year on the ground since 2009 is you meet a lot of people, because most all of those animals get rehomed, right? In some aspect, right? You get the steers that we talked about, those get in the freezer, but you still have a good 10, 12 females every year that you're placing with new homes. And a lot of people tend to buy one or two, right? They don't buy 6 at a time. And so we've got great friends all over the states of Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, and then that was previous to really 2020. And then since 2020, Highlands have become vogue across the U.S. I just sent a couple down to South Carolina and Kentucky right before Christmas. I've got a couple going to Virginia here in a couple of weeks. I just sold a couple to Wisconsin. We've got new friends all over the U.S. It's pretty cool.
Are we going to be shipping semen back to Scotland?
Great question. We have not done that yet. Now we're working on some ways to possibly do that. What I will say is, this is the old supply and demand thing.
Yeah.
There are a lot more Highland cattle and a lot more breeders in the United States than Scotland.
Right.
And that's just size, right? Everything,
Yep.
right? There's more people here. It's amazing that all those European countries populated the United States and we're so much bigger than them now from that aspect. So the reasons you would do it are more marketing than they are demand. So there's some things we're working on. Some things one cool thing we're working on right now is we are working on shipping embryos to Japan, which
Whoa.
as far as we know, we would be the first Highland embryos in the country of Japan.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So it's far enough along here that I'll say we're going to be doing it, but we don't want somebody to scoop the story. But
Right.
so that's pretty cool. We've sent to Canada and Australia and other places otherwise too.
No, that's really cool. That was just a random question I had. It'd be a little bit ironic, right?
There is one farm that I am aware of in the United States that has shipped semen back to Scotland.
Okay.
And they just did it recently within the last couple of years.
Okay.
And again, it was for marketing reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can totally see that. One of my dad's buddies he's got some Wagyu cattle.
Mhm.
And I think it'd be interesting to cross the two, perhaps. Maybe.
I've actually some Highland Wagyu crosses.
And what's the verdict?
They don't have hair
Okay.
like a Highland does.
So they're not going to be as.
They're not going to be as. But what I can't speak to is the meat. Like I've
Right.
only seen the outside of them. They're interesting because they're almost opposites on the end of the spectrum.
That's why it's such an interesting thing.
Yeah.
It's like an oil and water
Yeah.
a little bit.
Yeah. So it would be interesting to see what characteristics come through in that type of breeding. So
Yeah. And who knows that anybody's ever going to do it. You said somebody's done it and you've seen it, but
Yep.
it'll be interesting to see flavor profile and fat content and all that kind of stuff. But what I really like about Scottish Highland meat is it's so red and it's so dense. And
Right.
ours is grass fed. And then we do give them a little bit of corn towards the end, but that's mostly just to get them to move around where they want to,
Sure.
where we want them.
I had a customer once, and this was in the early days, and I wish I could remember who the customer was, but people would ask me all the time, like, how do you describe Highland beef? And so I always struggled with describing it in the same ways that you said. And I had a customer that I always used to say, well, that's just a funny question. It actually just tastes like beef. And that's what he'd say because
It's the most beef tasting beef.
right. Yeah. Because everything that you would buy in the store, or especially a lot of stuff that comes from mainstream, this is so watered down and lacks flavor and isn't red, the deep dark red, which is all the things that we get in the Highland beef.
Yeah. And I love it. And you just know where your food's coming from. And I'm preaching to the choir a little bit, but
Sure.
yeah, you get me.
That's
We
okay.
get
Preach
each
on,
other.
brother Alex. Preach on.
All right. All right. So we're going to move on to another question that we had. What would you say were the biggest challenges that you faced getting to where you are today with so many operations?
Yeah, I think early on from an entrepreneur standpoint is you have to, and my challenges is learning where to spend your time, right? Because there's lots of shiny objects that people like to chase, and you can chase them. And I've chased them in my life as well. So that's probably the biggest challenge that I had is yes, shiny things develop, and sometimes they're really cool and they become new things. And I've done that, and I've had businesses that I've started and failed, and we put the rest for too many shiny things at one time. So I think that's the biggest thing for me was learning to focus. Doing things well is better than many. In that case, I would say for me, I'm naturally a shiny chaser. So that was tough for me.
Yeah. A bit of a dreamer.
Yeah.
I saw the sign in the bathroom.
Yeah.
Maybe snagged a picture.
Sure. Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's the biggest thing. And I think on the opposite side of it, that's also a strength, right? The ability to be able to see those things sometimes that other people don't see. Shiny is different to everybody, and some people don't see any shiny at all, unfortunately.
Yeah. Shiny is different to everybody, whether it's an interest in sports or something else. What do you ultimately want to be the result of all your time and efforts? And you control your input, but sometimes you don't control the output. So if you focus on the input and the things you control, usually it seems to take care of itself. So,
Absolutely.
but I get the dreaming part. I'm a dreamer as well.
Sure. But we got to find for ways to execute and pay for those dreams.
Exactly.
So that in and of itself, the fact that you have to have a livelihood, that's the kind of economy we're in, we're still in that aspect that pure economics of it makes you prioritize. That
Right.
sometimes that's what has to win.
Yep.
And it's usually for a good reason.
Yep. No doubt. Thanks for sharing. And then maybe another question here that we got is, could you describe maybe like the turning point when you thought that your business, you really were like, gosh, I'm starting to reap what I've been sowing for so long? Or was it just a gradual thing and you've just always been in it?
Yeah.
Because you talked about at a very young age, you've been an entrepreneur, hard work ethic, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. When I was a kid, the first business I started was called Josh Krenz's Rabbit Tree. And I'd raised rabbits and sold bunnies. And all of the pet stores in Eau Claire, Wisconsin bought all of their bunnies from me for a period of about 2 years. And I was 12 at that time.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so, yes, I've always been a little bit of an entrepreneur. I think the part of that when you know that you're an entrepreneur or you don't is just, I think you just know, right? You just know. And some people have to go to work every day and get a paycheck and have to have that certainty. And I would say that's 99.9% of people. And that's okay.
Definitely need people that do that stuff. And then the crazy people like me who's got dreams and all these things and takes all kinds.
The turning point is when a dream turns into not just your dream.
Right.
When people see the vision, it goes from shiny object to vision. And I think that's where the part where entrepreneurs sometimes fail, certain entrepreneurs, is the ability to communicate that vision, right? So sometimes the greatest ideas or businesses, the reason that they fail isn't because it wasn't a good idea. It was the ability to communicate that idea, get other people on board with it, and to move it forward, because it doesn't matter if you think it's the greatest thing ever, right?
You all have to be on the same page and using the same words and be on the same sheet of music, and you have to be bought in.
Yeah.
So I totally get that.
So from a specific business standpoint, we go back to Highland Genetics, the semen embryo company that we had. In the Highland world, we were really late to adapt to AI and embryos as compared to other breeds. Other breeds have been, like I talked about, I was 8 years old and I was lining up what cows we should have in the barn AI to which bulls that would have came from at that state, a company called Tri-State Genetics. In the Highland world, I had been doing AI for quite a while before I started the company, and I had been trying to sell it to other people along the way. And it wasn't until we got the message, right? That the why, the how, and we made it easy, enough so that shortly after we started that genetic company, there were a couple other Highland breeders that also started companies, right?
Okay.
So and what that did is it made everybody successful because it was no longer just Josh Krenz's idea, right?
Right.
Even though there were other competitive companies out there, it's the old saying that we all made the pie bigger.
Right.
So do you want the whole pie when the pie is nothing? Or do you want to have 20% of an idea that helps the industry move completely forward?
Yeah.
And that was to your question, that was the moment that when somebody else started a business that looked just like ours several months after we did it, we knew we were going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a pretty good sign. What is the saying about flattery?
Yeah. 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 What is it? Copying something, or imitation is
imitation is the most sincere form of flattery.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yep.
We found it.
That's right.
So yeah, you knew you were onto something. And yeah, I've observed that in my business career as well, as you find somebody who is starting something up and all of a sudden something with barely a different name pops up on Instagram and they're doing the same thing.
Flattery.
Yeah, I totally get it. So, well, and like technology and things are moving really fast right now, but back in the day, there are multiple farm country trader type magazine companies out there. So it's more about what you're continuing to do to either get ahead of the game or differentiate yourself.
Right. That the old word is innovation, right? If you stop innovating, if you stop reinventing yourself, if you stop meeting whatever that next need is, and you stay stagnant, then you die.
Right.
And your business loses, then the business goes, you get none of the pie, right?
None of the pie.
You have right to nothing at that point.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's my business partner, Mark. He always says, would you rather have either a half a watermelon or a quarter of a grape? Something like that. Yeah, totally get it. when it comes to getting people to buy in on your dream, what was it, the raising the rabbits and selling them to the pet stores that helped you fund your first initiative, or did you have to go out and convince some people? Or
Let's just say the rabbits, all they did was buy my first Nintendo and some more rabbits. That's what it was. They're 12 years old, but probably gas money. I paid my grandma to drive me places. So part of it is it depends on how much does your idea cost? Ideas don't have to cost money, right? They're bootstrapping ideas. And Highland Genetics and Windland Flats were both examples of bootstrapping. We self-funded those, funded them from one business to the other, really, because Windland Flats was developed first, and Windland Flats helped fund Highland Genetics as we had an early investment, right? If you want to collect semen and you collect embryos, you have to pay for that before you got something to sell.
there's upfront costs for sure.
We had to create infrastructure. We had to do all of those things. Another venture that I have is I have a fertilizer company. We do micronutrients and biostimulants. We're a wholesale provider. You can look at us as like a manufacturer. So we sell to large wholesale companies as a technology. So we would sell to companies who then sell to a retailer who then sell to a grower. So we're way at the top of the chain from that aspect. That was a bigger idea that needed a lot more funding up front. So I went and got 4 business partners to start that company.
Okay.
And those business partners, the whole motivation behind that was that they all had money.
Yeah.
And I didn't. And so
Yeah. But you had a passion.
I had a passion.
And they probably saw that in your eyes a little bit.
Yep. Passion and a book full of people I could call once I had the business started, but I needed capital to get that business going. And that was 10 years ago, actually, this March, that I started that company. And to celebrate in 2024, I bought my last business partner out.
Oh, wow.
So independently owned, they got out of it what they wanted to. These were all people that were 30, 40 years my senior. So they didn't want to be in it forever. So they wanted to get their return on investment. So they did. And on the other aspect of it, they also got to help mentor somebody else in the business.
Cool.
And so it was a win for everybody.
Win. That's what we shoot for whenever you can. That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's two different sides, right? On the cattle business, you're scraping it, which there's all kinds of entrepreneurs out there that scrape every single day. And that's what we do. And then all the way to the other end, I had to get non-traditional funding. And there's all kinds of things in the middle, right? You can get SBA funding and you can go to the bank and you can go to friends and family and lots of things in the middle. The key thing on either one of those to be successful, for anybody to give you money or for you to self-fund yourself, you need to have a plan, right? And you have to have it laid out of what that plan is going to look like and how you're going to invest on it. Because I think the biggest mistake that people make as entrepreneurs is they forget to pay themselves back. And so that is you have to weigh that out. So I could have I took money from Windland Flats to help fund Highland Genetics in this essence. And I took money from myself to fund Windland Flats. What else could have I done with that money? Because that's the opportunity cost, right? You have to weigh that out.
Yep. Know all about opportunity cost. Yeah. I went to Iowa State for ag business, it's in the same building as the economics building. And so opportunity cost is something we're pretty familiar with.
Yeah. I saw that light go on. You're like, oh crap, I'm back in an economics class right now. They're like, he said a buzzword, right? He must have an MBA or something. He started putting buzzwords out there. So yeah.
Yeah. So wise.
Yeah.
So wise. Yeah. No, even those really simple classes that I remember taking them, if the professor's good and he's gonna figure out a way to get it to stick in your head. And I remember we had this teacher and he always used beer and cigars whenever he could throw that on an XY.
Very memorable to a college
Yeah,
student.
very memorable when you're going through that time of your life. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. How can I relate to these kids today? So at least he was trying to relate.
Yeah, because you only want so many cigars with a beer and vice versa. So
sure,
we were learning about, I think, utility curves. Or
there you
something
go.
like that.
And he was applying real life lessons at the same time.
Yeah, trying to reach the kids and impact lives.
Right on.
No, he's a great guy. We'll move on to, let's see. This is a good one. So obviously the world's changing ever faster, always, all the time. Here we are sitting with some equipment that you used to be with the radio station back in your college days. And you're probably seeing some new things. So how do you how do you stay relevant, and how do you how do you separate the wheat from the chaff when new technology is coming along as it applies to your day to day and working with a farm and being online, selling to customers in Minneapolis, stuff like that?
Yeah. The greatest part about our generation, you talk about people that were born in their 30s and 40s, in the 30s and 40s, and what they've seen and changed during that period of time. And I was at a conference where they talked about, so if you were born in 1940 and you lived to, let's say, 2020, during that period of time, that amount of change on a great timeline was like the equivalent of 10 years, right? And the technology. And in today, if you took 2020 to 25, and if you were born in 2020 to 25 in that same timeline, you might have experienced expedited 5 times that in that given period of time as they're trying to prove that point. And I think that's what's been interesting about our time period of what we had to deal with and the definitions of technology. And today, the big buzzword is AI, and we try to apply that, especially in our fertilizer business, every single day as we go out to fields and we work with farmers, and people are talking about AI helping us decide what's best for those fields. Is that the right AI? We haven't determined that. There's 100 companies out there right now trying to figure out what the AI is from an agronomy standpoint that works and that's
Right.
cost effective for the farmer at the end of the day. So that's really interesting on a practical standpoint. And then you have your day-to-day business about how you communicate to customers and how do you get communicated back to, right? Like, how do you decipher information? Because I think for me, as a person who's not for lack of things to do, you're always trying to figure out how do you best disseminate and ingest information in a timely manner. And that's where probably technology has become useful. But I think the part for me as you sort through it is making sure that the technology doesn't narrow the information that you receive.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the big concern with different answer engines and generative AI.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why we were talking before we started. We were talking about, do I listen to podcasts and other podcasts? And I still do, because part of that is it's still the human element.
It's pretty hard to fake.
It's hard to
especially if you
fake,
know who Josh is, or
Right.
Alex, or
Right.
Farm Country Trader, Windland Flats. There's still this human element that
Right.
it's going to be tough to crack that one.
We don't know who's tweeting on X, right? You don't know who's in the back.
You have no idea. Yeah.
But we know whose voice you're hearing right now. Yes, we could be AI generated voices right now, right? But
Right.
highly unlikely.
Highly
right?
unlikely.
Like, who wants to
Yeah.
spend the time to replicate us?
Right. What a boring life.
Yeah.
I don't know what they're getting, but I'll take some.
That's right.
All right. Yeah. AI is crazy. Just
Yeah.
to piggyback off that a little bit with our day-to-day life as a marketing and software development company, but also helping people with their different advertising needs, is what new AI tools are out there that you can use to increase your efficiencies, and what are they worth? Sometimes I feel like going back to paper in a filing cabinet would be much easier compared to some of these different systems that are out there. And then constantly changing it. Everybody knows how to use a filing cabinet. It's just, it's a crazy world we live in. There's so many big players. AI just has exploded, probably 1,000+ other AI startups. And it's just a whole boom. And like something I was talking to somebody about recently is, ChatGPT is one of the big players owned by Microsoft.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And with how we're changing our search, we being the world, the trend right now is everybody's going to answer engines, whether it's Grok or ChatGPT or, all these, there's 10 other ones, but making sure that just doing the simple things like being listed with Bing on your business profile is now a little more important. Whereas before, Google definitely was the one in control of that, because they're sending you all that organic traffic. Right. And all of a sudden there's a new acronym that pops up, answer engine optimization, and what you should do. And it's a crazy world we live in, but can't beat that human element.
No, you can't beat the human element. And all of this is being figured out still as we go. So how do you know? There's 1,000 AI companies right now. But to me, the reason it's still being figured out is there's almost as many consultants right now telling you about AI.
Right.
That's
I
where
had one in my office yesterday.
yeah, that's what when there's a whole economy of consultants that have developed around a technology, it hasn't been figured out.
Right. And there's a lot of people working on it too.
Yeah.
It's crazy the amount of human resources that's going towards figuring this out. And once we get to like quantum computing and stuff, which is way above, I'm sure, both of our heads, but it's just like lightning fast answer everything.
Yeah.
So
yeah, those are the technology conversations where sometimes you go back to simplicity of just talking to people and looking them in the face. And you can take that even a step further. I just go talk to cows. It's the most simple. It's hard to fake that.
they don't talk
right?
back.
They don't talk back.
They can be a little sassy every once in a while.
Sure. And we're not saying they're not intelligent, right? It's not that.
No,
they're sometimes that form of intelligence is sometimes even more intelligent than the AI.
I would say so too. And it's real.
Yes.
It's not based on any other information other than its biological reality.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
Yeah. Anyways, and we all know that different cattle have different personalities. I'm sure you've observed that on your farm. And
absolutely. You saw that with Celia. She was a pretty nice, docile cow. So.
Yeah. No, I've always been pretty proud of Celia, and we get tons of people commenting on what's going on with her and was she pregnant over the years, stuff like that. And so people followed along, and we've been able to share that. So
yeah,
that's where our Heritage Hills farming efforts left off, and trying to grow the herd and whatnot. But yeah, no, there's definitely still a ton of interest in the Scottish Highland breed, and seems like more and more every day, whether somebody wants, there's lots of different flavors for everybody, but I don't know how much we want to get into it, but like the miniature Scottish Highland that is so trendy and vogue right now, as opposed to a registered Scottish Highland purebred.
right.
What are your comments on that? Or is that taboo to even talk about?
So every cattle breed has gone through some sort of populist opinion at some point in time of different things, right? Whether it's, so if you go back, take a breed like Simmental, they used to all be mostly red with black being recessive, and now they're mostly blacks, right? Because somebody thought it was important. And you look at Herefords went miniature only for a small group of them, and then they broke off and people bred with that. And so Highlands are going through some of the same thing. The difference there in Highlands a little bit is it's a little bit more of the example of Kleenex. People say minis, or they say mini Highlands, and they think everything. At least in some of these other examples, like the integrity of what those breeds, like people still understood what they were doing. Like they wanted a semi, but they wanted it to be black. And so they understood that and maybe didn't change some of the other characteristics that are vital to the breed. And what we see in minis and Highlands is 99% of those are crossbred of some sort, usually with a Dexter, or maybe it's some people have little high parks that they call mini Highlands, which are a cross with what do you call those parks? What the other part of it, but there's a couple other breeds out there that you cross Highlands with, and they look Highlandish, and then people call them mini Highlands.
Yep.
And so my point is it's become a Kleenex. Bunny XO is. So she's a social media person.
I think I have
Jelly Roll. She hangs out with Jelly Roll.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure if that's his girlfriend. They all just live in the same complex. He's got, anyways, I don't need to get into Jelly Roll's life.
I didn't know we were going to talk about
Jelly Roll today. Me neither. But Bunny XO was just on social media this week. She bought some mini Highlands.
All right.
Yeah. And so me, judging that, been doing this for a little while, so I'm not going to say I'm a Highland expert, but I'm pretty darn close. What she had come out of her trailer and what she called many Highlands was a mismatch of a bunch of different crossbred type of things that still had some horns and long hair, which that's the thing. If they have horns and long hair, they must be a Highlander, right?
They must be a male.
Yeah, they must be a male too. Yeah, we had that earlier. But that was one of those things. You brought it up, mini Highlands. They're popular, but they're really not the Highland as a Highland breed.
Right.
They have some characteristics. Usually it's just the hair. Sometimes it's the horns. Sometimes they have no horns at all. And so the hair is the biggest single factor. They have that look, and then people call them a Kleenex. That's really what it is.
Yeah. And I feel like a trained eye, somebody who's been in it for a while, can identify that. But if you're not living it every day, checking on the cows, feeding them, making sure there's water,
Right.
Cows are cows, and you drive by them, or some of these people probably don't even drive by them. They fly over them unless they see them at their final destination.
So you see them like any other popular pet, because that's what I'll call them. They're a pet in this instance. Those people aren't buying them to eat them. So
Lawn ornaments.
they're lawn ornaments, they're pets. So the people who are serious about sustainability and wanting to have some cattle in their own backyard, what happens is usually they're all on their own journey, but within a given period of time, call it a year or two, they figure out these minis that they got sold don't meet their family's needs, right? They can't produce beef out of it. They're not sustainable in every fashion of the definition. And those people end up finding actual American Highland Cattle Association registered Highland cattle. I have some from some people in November, it was right after Thanksgiving, actually it was on Black Friday, from Iowa who bought a heifer from me, who it's their first ACA registered heifer. Everything else that they have on their farm is a mini.
Okay.
And then they are the definition of what I just described, right? Got into it because they thought it was a Highland. It was a Kleenex. And now they're moving into actual animals that they can use on their farm, use on their homestead, provide meat to their community, do all the things that regular beef cattle would do. They're not lawn ornaments.
Yeah. And there's something really tough and beautiful about livestock and having cattle and any animals for any instance that are meant for meat production. But even those that are not, because they have a finite amount of time just like us. And
Right.
you don't like, I don't know about you, but I don't like waste. And so obviously even humans get past their production abilities later in age, but with cattle, they still can provide nourishment and nutrients and all the stuff that we need. And it's just kind of part of the circle of life that we live and you learn about when you grow up on a farm. But
That's right. Yeah, it's a different perspective that we have having grown up in agriculture. And not saying Bunny XO doesn't have an agriculture experience. I have no idea what her experience is.
right.
And I'm picking on her only because she was on social media this week. So if you want to reach back to me, I'll put my mom on here, Bunny XO. But the important part is that people all have their different definitions of what is important to them, and these mini Highlands in that aspect. But it can't be confused for what you were just talking about, Alex, and what cattle were truly meant to be, from what we've learned from an agriculture standpoint, and what the U.S., the breadbasket of the world, has done in providing meat for people's tables across the world. We couldn't do it without cattle.
And I don't see a path that way either. And I'm not going to be eating 3D printed steak anytime soon.
No,
I don't care what they put in it.
exactly. Yeah, I'm with you.
I do understand how people have different needs when it comes to food. Some people are lactose intolerant, and you got to be sensitive to that. I know people who can't have milk, but they can have raw milk, and they don't have any issues. It's just a weird and regulated world that we live in, and everybody wants to separate you from natural, it seems. So I think we'll take a break and let you go and pick up your kids. We've got about 15 minutes left here and we wanted to wrap up. So we are going to dive back into some of the questions we had. We're talking about some of the AI tools and how you stay relevant with technology and everything like that. But we're going back to your story, and I'd love to catch a memorable story that you have from your farming life or your experience with flats or Highland genetics or whatever projects you got going on.
Yeah, I think, when it comes down to no matter what you do, and we talk about, I've got a few different hats going on here from an entrepreneurial standpoint. At the end of the day, whatever you get into it because it's something that you love.
Right.
And so you got to come back on those days when they're bad days. You got to think about the reason why you're in it. Right. And farming is challenging, right? Whether it's cattle farming or agronomy, or if you're doing whatever, there's challenges in all things. So I would say for me, so having grown up as a farm kid and always knew that I wanted to get into cattle, and then for other reasons I wasn't able to have cattle for a while, and then now that I've got kids, wanting to pass that passion on to the next generation. And it's people say with kids with sports all the time, right? Oh, I wasn't as good a football player as I could have been. I need to push that on my kid. And you try not to do that in the cattle business. So you ease it into it. But it was pretty special this year. My daughter showed one of our heifers at the county fair and at our regional Highland Cattle Association, Austin, Minnesota, on her own. And you're like, oh, that's no big deal. She's 8 years old at the time that she did it. And I never got to do that when I was that age.
So you get to provide them something that you really wanted to do as a kid that you didn't get to do for whatever circumstance.
Like the sports kids, but in a way, but do it in a way, I didn't want to do it in a way where it was like, I felt like she felt like she had to, right?
Right.
If it wasn't right for her, if she didn't want to do stuff with cattle, it would be okay. Would I be sad? Yes.
Yeah, there's a little piece of you that hopes that they'll go to the same college or do some of the, maybe go to the same high school or elementary school that you went to or things like that. It's totally human.
Yeah. So if I'm having a bad day and you're chasing cows because they got out of the fence or whatever happened that day, you can think back on those things. And that was just a recent thing this year. There's been lots of other great memories in the cattle business as well, but that's pretty cool. That was probably one of the proudest dad moments that I've had so far. So.
I believe it. I actually got the chills a little bit when you were talking about it because my son, Herb, he just keeps saying he wants to be a farmer. And that has nothing to do with, I haven't told him he has to be a farmer. I keep telling him basically don't.
Right. Yeah, I grew up.
Or you can do other things too, buddy. You don't just have to farm. There's lots of stuff that you can do in agriculture.
I think that hopefully says something for what they are seeing, right? Because to a certain extent, a kid's view is 100%. So if you didn't like it, then they would have a really bad attitude about it.
Right.
Like, that's my perspective. Because kids don't. They just don't. They take everything for what it is.
Right.
And they see through most things that people can't, right? Or adults would choose not to.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you hated farming, if you hated agriculture, if I hated getting up and going and doing stuff with the cattle, they wouldn't have that same reflection.
They're like a lens.
Yeah.
Or kind of a mirror into kind of where you're at, so to speak.
Absolutely.
So they feed off that passion and all that kind of stuff too.
Definitely.
All right. So we're going to move on to another question. I haven't really asked you too much because I want to be as unskewed as possible. I haven't asked you if you know about Farm Country Trader or if you've heard about it. We've talked about our history of what we're working on and everything. Worlds collide eventually. And so my dad started in 1989. It was a farm magazine up in this area, and we still have a web presence and searchable database full of farm equipment. You were just talking about looking for a skid loader, stuff like that. So it's hard to weed what's what. But so with your marketing mind, I guess this is me putting you in the hot seat. What advice do you have for me and my team as we revitalize a brand that has gone from traditional media all the way to trying to keep up in today's technology?
Yeah. I think what you've just described there is a little bit of what a lot of agriculture is trying to figure out. There's a lot of components of agriculture that isn't the same as it was in 1989. And if those have been in agriculture long enough, remember the drought of 88, and your dad got it right after that. And there's tough times in agriculture. There's high interest rates. There's a lot of bad things going on in the 80s.
Variable interest loans and people losing the farm. And
So that's like the first thing that comes to my mind is as you're building and maybe repositioning yourself of who you are and who the company is, because that's what you are. Companies are a reflection of people, is not to forget where you've come from. There's a lot of, it's easy to get into the media business today to a certain extent, right?
To a certain extent.
Yep. But to be able to do it right, to have the experience to do it. Anybody can walk around with a phone and try to get on Facebook and say they're media, right? That's not media, right? That's not true media. So I would my big thing was don't forget where you're from. Don't be, what I would say this way is don't be hesitant to tell people about that. You have a brand, you have something to talk about. You've lived through those years, your dad had all that experience. You have that experience through him and your own experience, and yours is different than his too, so.
World's different.
Yeah, totally.
That's crazy what happens in just a few short years. He stepped down back in 2017 roughly, and then I stepped in 2018, and so here we are. He knew that I needed to make it my own a little bit, and we were going through some transition. We've talked about all the different brands that we have.
Sure.
DCH is technically the company, Digital Community Holdings, DCH.com. is where you can find all of our brands, but each brand has its own website and its own initiatives and its own goals, trying to connect buyers and sellers, stuff like that. It sounds really simple, but you got to get the word out there, and that's just part of the deal.
Yeah. Yep, it is part of the deal. But because you have that history, you come from agriculture, you are, in essence, have been a part of that community for a long time. I think that there's other, probably what I call competitive platforms that can't say that. And so you got to make sure that you talk about it. Everybody has a story. And I think for a certain part is human nature, we get humbled a little bit, and we get taught in school, and we get taught coming up that you shouldn't talk about yourself. Except when it comes to
Hate to hear yourself talk, and now here we are.
yeah.
Right?
But this is the classic, like, you need to tell your story because no one else is going to tell it for you.
Yeah, exactly. And they teach you that right away in college. One of the first things it seemed like that they taught us is you need to get your elevator pitch figured out right now. We're going to practice it. Probably don't have too much on your resume. We're going to be building that. What'd you do in high school? Did you have any chores? Did you help on the farm? How do you build yourself? And
Right.
Unfortunately, if you're not doing it, nobody else is.
Right.
It's very hard to get people to build your own personal brand. Can't lack there either, because there is the Josh Krenz still
Sure.
behind all the Windland flats and the Highland genetics and everything else you got going on, that hopefully we can keep this conversation going and keep growing together and whatnot.
Yeah.
So
It's been
I don't see you getting out of agriculture anytime soon.
No, I like to think of myself as a lifer. So, and I won't be leaving by my own choice. It'll be a pine box probably. So.
Yeah. No, that's great. Pine's great. It's a renewable resource,
That's
right?
right. That's right. We should bring that back.
Bring it back. Yeah. No, it was great taking the trip up here. It was about a 4.5 hour drive. Get to the end of your driveway and just pull in. Beautiful white fences and Scottish Highlands everywhere. Beautiful yellow house. Your barn, you repurposed instead of taking it down or letting it go backwards. I've seen so many barns on the way up here, or even houses that are just too far gone. And reduce, reuse, recycle. You try and be sustainable and a good steward as a farmer as well. And this building is a testament to that, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And people probably maybe didn't realize when they'll see the picture that we're in a barn right now. We're in an old 30 cow dairy barn built in 1940. We're upstairs where they used to have 10,000 small square bales. And you can feel all the sweat and humidity and dust, and I'll get you choked up a little bit, literally. But that was all blood, sweat, and tears. That was the life of farm. And you're right. It's I'm not from this area. This is not a family farm. This was another family's farm. Used to be the old Jackson farm, is what people know this in this area. And when we came down the driveway, this barn was going to fall down.
Yeah.
The sides of it were sticking out. There were holes in the roof. You could see where all the windows had been shot out from people shooting pigeons. And we were very fortunate to have been in a position to fix it and repurpose it for what we're doing here and what we're doing today. And it makes me sad when you drive around and see all the barns that aren't going to make it and haven't made it.
Yeah. It's definitely sad. We've seen a lot of changes over the years, consolidations between different farm equipment dealers and stuff like that. And so but that's all market driven too. And so just got to find where you fit in.
That's right.
All right. And then we're going to go into one last question for you, and I'll let you ask some questions at the end if you come up with any for me. All right. We're going forward. We're looking into the future. Where are you going? Where are your brands going? Where are you going? 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever you can see, however far Josh can see out.
Yeah, you already joked about I'm going to be in agriculture for a long time, and I said until the pine box comes, and that. So I don't see that changing. I think our root of who we are is we're in farming, and so that's not going to change. Our brands will continue to support the local community that we're in. When it comes to, from fork to table, from that aspect, that's for farm to table, I guess, is the saying, I should say. But we're going to continue to do that. We've got a local community that has been very supportive of our grass-fed Highland beef. That's our beginning brand was Windland Flats. And so we'll continue to do that. I think what we've learned in the world of media and things that we live in is I think we're only going to have to get closer to that community in different ways and continue to be, I think, transparent, which we try really hard to be.
Right.
But I think that means something different than it did 10 years ago.
Yep.
And I think the other thing that's changing when it comes to us is as farmers is getting really comfortable on our personal farm with our brands of inviting people in as part of the process. What I mean is we're doing more to have people come in and see the behind the scenes of the work that goes into it. And before it was more of a pain in the butt. Like you don't want that. You don't want people, you don't want liability on your farm. Watch out for those PETA people, all that type of stuff. And I actually think that in our brands, people are really hungry for that even more. So we're going to continue to do that. In the Highland Genetics brand, there is a whole group of people, when we talked about earlier in the whole Highland versus Kleenex conversation, I didn't even use the other word, but that they're hungry for knowledge and education and things. And so we started an event a couple of years ago at Highland Genetics with my business partner in that, Bruce, and around education. And we're going to bring that back more this year. We've started doing some more of our own, not quite podcasts, but like 3 to 5 minute, just quick videos on learning and education with one of our employees, Holly, that works with us. And so I see that growing in the next 5, 10, 15 years where we change from a company that was just about growing genetics of Highlands. And I think it's going to be turning into promotion of the breed and promotion of educating people as they come into it, which in essence, we have been doing that, but I think we're going to lean into it even harder.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn. I can tell you just in my short experience with the Scottish Highland breed, I've learned a tremendous amount since 2000. And I was just thinking about that on my ride up is, wow, I might not be a master, but I'm proficient.
Sure.
Dangerous. I know enough to be dangerous.
Sure.
So, but yeah, it takes a lot to get all these different avenues lined up to have the guy who can process the animal and take the animal, or if you need to sell a calf, or, there's just so many different things going on, and then you got to work with the space that you have. And so that always makes it interesting as well.
Right.
So
absolutely.
All right. That does it for questions I have for you. Have you thought of anything that you'd like to discuss before we sign off officially?
Yeah, I think, one thing when you hear podcasts and you hear of all different people is sometimes what gets missed is because you're jumping in at different points in time is people don't get to totally, in this case, hear Alex's story and Alex's motivation. So my simple question is, so why the podcast? What's the motivation, Alex? What are you trying to achieve as you're doing all this? Because what you're doing isn't easy, right? There's a lot of equipment, there's a lot of things here, and it's also your time, right? And this goes beyond just building a brand, and there's other ways that you can build brands, and there's other forms of medias, but what's your objective?
Our objective is to basically get more brand awareness. We're going to multiple shows coming up. The Sioux Falls Farm Show is at the end of January. We'll be at a booth. I believe it's 8-8 if you want to check us out.
Sure, right off.
But the big thing that we've missed since we stopped printing would be our subscriber base. And essentially, if you want to call them subscribers or readers or users or whatever, you got to make sure that the audience that you were originally intending your content for still has something to cling on to. And they just have basic questions about where you're at. Not everybody talks to me every day, or my dad who started the company, and who knows how many years it's been, right?
Sure.
So when I go and talk to a 60-year-old guy and he asks me, are you still printing magazines? And I say, no, he's not even surprised. And that was the final blow, is when the guy that you think is the right demographic, the right age, male, typically dealing with cars or farm equipment. And that's changing too. There's lots of women in agriculture. But yeah, I mean, the times are changing, and I don't think there's nearly enough audio content out there. I might be wrong, but there's tons of really good stories and really cool people out there. And so that's why I'm doing it. And basically the real end goal is to just be giving a platform to people to talk about their own business. And if we get a little bit of recognition while we're doing it, that's just gravy on top. So
Sure. I think it's pretty cool, and I think it's good for those people that are listening to know this. Like, this isn't a paid thing. Josh's not getting paid. You're not getting paid. Yes, we're all trying to build brands, but in essence, in the world that we live in, that's what we're doing. Everybody's got their own personal brand. Everybody's got something that they're trying to achieve outside of that. And so the more that we can get out there and help each other and do that in different means, that's what it's all about.
No doubt. And yeah, it's not easy. There's been lots of hours that have gone into setting this up, and whether it's research or trying to understand if it's even worth my time or whatever it is. But the trend is everybody's going online, everybody's listening, whether it's an audiobook or a video, Spotify, YouTube, whatever. Right? You got to get it all out there to all those different platforms. But then you also got to make the farmer happy who doesn't want to listen to ads, but he wants to support you. So how do you do that? Go to the Farm Country Trader Patreon. It's $3 a month, less than a cup of coffee, no ads. Listen to me and Josh talk, learn about Scottish Highlands, stuff we're working on. Great.
Yep.
7-day free trial. It's just making it as easy as possible. When Dad left off with the magazine, we were trying to sell the magazines at $3. And I was searching for a price. What is this worth? What would you pay to listen to an ad-free conversation with? Obviously, I'm not the one that's valuable. I got to find somebody really valuable to talk to. And so
he's pointing across the other side of the room in case you're wondering.
Yeah, for everybody who's listening. Yeah. Yeah, it's going out there, finding those interesting stories, developing trust. I'm recording this onto a micro SD card in your barn right now. We're not using an Apple product where you know that anything you say in front of me is safe and it's going to get your stamp. And that says something, I think.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So with that, I think we'll end it. I've got to let you get back to the kids and the family, and I got to make the 4.5-hour trip home, and we still got to see your farm before it's too dark out, get some pictures. But is there anything you want to plug? Different social medias, URLs, brands, products?
Yeah, people can look us up on their favorite platform, but you can find Windland Flats. You can go to windlandflats.com and see our story a little bit more and learn about Highland Cattle and our grass-fed beef program. And if you're at all interested in making some of those Highland babies yourself, you can go to highlandgenetics.com and you can check that out, where we have Highland semen and embryos and lots of good educational resources, even if you're not in the Highland cattle, on how to AI cattle, how to handle cattle with horns, some of those components as well.
All right. Thank you for your time.
You got it, Alex. Appreciate you.
All right. Thanks for listening.